And our first panel discussion is on combating corruption through challenging social norms. And we have 4 panelists who will be discussing this today. So dear panelists, as I call on your name, I would ask that you switch your microphone on and your camera on once I call you to speak. So our first panelist for the day is Mr. Oliver Stolpe from the UNODC. Oliver is the country representative for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in Nigeria, and he has over 20 years experience working in the area of rule of law, with specific focus on programming and delivering technical assistance in justice sector reform, anti-corruption, stolen asset recovery, as well as crime prevention for the UNODC. So Oliver, thank you very much. We're excited that you can join us. Please stay muted till I welcome the rest of your colleagues for this discussion. So next, I'll be welcoming Mr. Waziri Adio, who is a strong fan of Step Up Nigeria. He was at the very first launch for the book as well. Mr. Waziri is the Executive Secretary of the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. He's a renowned journalist and policy strategist. You may also know him when he worked as a columnist and editor at the This Day newspapers, when he was special advisor to the Senate President, as well as a communication specialist in many different organizations. Mr. Waziri, thank you very, very much for joining us. I would like to call on Oliver. Sorry, I can't see you anymore. Your video can stay on. Mr. Waziri, you can also join him and switch on your video as well. Next person for this panel I would like to call on is Dr. Lena Hoffman from Chatham House. Dr. Lena is also a very close friend of ours who has been on our podcast on separate occasions, and she's an associate fellow of the Chatham House Africa program and the Nigeria country lead for the Africa program Social Norms and Accountable Governance project. She's also currently involved in researching socially shared beliefs, expectations, and informal institutions driving governance challenges in Nigeria and the wider West Africa as well. So Dr. Lena, thank you very much. Excited to see you here again. Thank you for joining us. And our final participants will be Ekanem Bassey. Ekanem is one of our board members for Step Up Nigeria. She's also a senior governance advisor at the Department for International Development, DFID. And an expert on civil society, media, anti-corruption reforms, governance, and capacity development. So thank you very much, Ekanem. You can go ahead and switch. Okay, you're there. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. We won't take too much of your time this evening. So like I said earlier, we'll be discussing combating corruption through challenging social norms. And I'll start with Dr. Lena, please. What are some of those social norms that drive corruption that you can tell us about?
Okay, I will unmute myself. Good evening, everyone. It is an absolute pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited about the launch today. And Farami, thank you so much for hosting and for having me on this panel. Like you said in the introduction or introducing the panel, we've been working on social norms of corruption for a couple of years now. We have had the opportunity, and when I say we, I'm talking about the Chatham House Africa program, of working in Nigeria in particular through the generosity of DFID. And our more recent work on social norms has been funded very generously by the MacArthur Foundation. So we're kind of sisters in funding opportunities from MacArthur, and it's very exciting and it is very meaningful that foundations like MacArthur are investing funding and supporting evidence gathering around social norms. Particularly around corrupt behavior. So I think one of the top points I wanted to make as we talk about norms that drive corruption is social norms work is very, very exciting and very, very interesting now, and seems to be kind of like a buzz area of analysis. But what we have been doing in the work we've done in Nigeria is really trying to operationalize our understanding of social norms. Even though corruption is pervasive, that does not mean that every kind of corruption is driven by social norms. So when we began our research around evidence gathering around norms of corruption, it was really, really important to be able to delineate what kinds of behavioral drivers inform different kinds of corruption. Social norms, norms tell us, and I think maybe also starting off with a general understanding of what social norms are. There are different definitions or understandings of social norms. One that I think is quite helpful, particularly in delineating different kinds of drivers of behavior, is understanding social norms as markers of behavior, how we behave in society. An example that works really well for me is that I am left-handed. I am strongly left-handed. I fully understand that in Nigerian society, when I am in Nigeria, I am not meant to use my left hand to give things to people. I'm very sensitive to that. So social norms, there has to be like an enforcement mechanism behind a norm for it to be a social norm. There have to be incentives and sanctions that enforce that kind of behavior as a social norm. So one of the norms that we found, in the work that we did around social norms, particularly on bribery in law enforcement context, we found that if you disaggregate the behavior of bribery in law enforcement, you would find that on one side of that behavior, there's a different driver of that behavior. So on the side of soliciting a bribe, that's from law enforcement, police, vehicle inspection, etc., there was a strong social norm of asking for a bribe, for soliciting a bribe. And that points to or pointed to pressures within law enforcement and that particular group for asking for a bribe. But we found that in the giving of a bribe, so bribery giving, there wasn't a social norm that informed that kind of behavior. People engage in that behavior because they saw other people doing it. So it's really, I think, one of the highlights of talking about social norms or norms of corruption is being able to break down which parts of a behavior are independent, so independent of what other people are doing, and what parts of behaviors are interdependent. And social norms of corruption are interdependent kinds of behaviors. So norms of corruption that drive corruption in Nigeria, some of the norms that we find are around social pressures. So sociability norms. So these are norms around reciprocity, do me, I do you. Those are quite strong norms that inform the way people respond in situations where they feel pressure to engage in a particular kind of behavior. There are in-group kinds of social pressures or norms. So these relate to pressures to, say, give a job to someone from your village, someone from your family, those types of things. And finally, there are norms or social drivers that are horizontal and are vertical. So we found this particularly, and dialing back to the example I was giving about law enforcement or bribery in law enforcement, there are very, very powerful social pressures within that context that drive solicitation of bribery. So horizontal in terms of from other colleagues. So these are group dynamics that are very, very powerful. And the ways in which you will intervene in those kinds of behavior will be very, very different if you were dealing with a norm or a behavior that was just informed by just people engaging in because other people engage in that kind of behavior. So, and then vertical, so pressures from people from more senior ranking officials in police force, for example. These are very powerful drivers of behavior. So I think just to conclude on norms that drive corruption, what I find or what I think is very, very exciting about the work that you are doing and the increasing highlighting and underscoring of the power of motivations and social drivers and social influences on corruption is that we're beginning to have conversations of the unwritten rules that reinforce corruption in places like Nigeria, where corruption seems to be pervasive. And these complement enforcement, enforcement from, say, anti-corruption agencies, and are particularly very, very, very important. So just on that note, I think I'll just stop there and let panelists contribute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hoffman. Thank you very much for those contributions. I would like to kindly ask everyone again, welcome to those who just joined. Please ensure that your camera is switched off through the discussion as well as your microphone so that everyone can see the panelists as they speak. Mr. Waziri, I cannot see you. I'm not sure if it's just from my end or if your camera is not yet on. But my next question is for you. So, sir, please, just following up from what Dr. Hoffman has spoken of, what are some other social norms that you can point out that drive corruption in Nigeria?
Okay, thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes, sir, clearly. Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay, fantastic. Thank you for inviting me to this panel, and congrats to Step Up Nigeria, Basement, Mercator, and others for supporting this. I think this is a very important conversation to have, especially at a time like this. It's difficult to speak after a doctor, but I'll give it a small shot. I think the first thing I want to say is that we need to look at what are we talking about in terms of social norms. Basically, building on what Dr. Hoffman said, it's about shared understanding about what is right and what is wrong, what is permissible, what is expected, and what is obligatory. So if we look at it in that sense, I also want to lean on what Dr. College said about looking at behavioral change. In most instances, when we do this analysis, we start with what we can observe, which is the end behavior. People are engaged in wrong practices. But if you take this approach, you have to scale back 2 steps. The first is that before you get to behavior, you have attitudes that condition people to such behaviors. And before you get to attitudes, you also have value system. So you have to look at it at 3 levels: values, attitude, and behavior. So talking about social norms are not necessarily negative all the time, but when we are linking it to the ones that enable corruption, I think we can look at it in 2 ways. The first one are norms around how we conceive of public, or government generally. We have a very problematic relationship with public office. We see it as a domain that belongs to nobody, and a place where everybody goes to help themselves. A domain where certain things that we consider to be immoral in the private domain. I'm also leaning on the famous paper, by Peter Eke and other people that spoke about the bifurcation of morality, where you have 2 realms, where you have the private realm and you have the public realm. And the private realm is the realm of morality, where you have all the norms enforced, is a normative realm. But you also have the public domain seen as immoral, and where many things that are not allowed in the private domain are seen as permissible. Okay, it's a long story, but the sum of it is that we unnecessarily idealize public office. We see it as a place where people can do anything that they want, and they can get away with so many things. So that is one set of norms. I'm going to talk more about them shortly. The second are certain norms that are not necessarily negative, that serve well in other domains, but when you apply them to the public domain, they become problematic. So let's start from the public domain kind of norms, the way we configure public office in much of this is a place where you are there to help yourself. It's not necessarily about service. You are there to help yourself, and it belongs to you, and you are lucky to be there. And certain things are expected of you. You are expected to take care of yourself. Let me give you an example. If you see somebody in public office, there are certain things we expect as standard. We expect them to live well, even when their salaries cannot take care of that. We expect, and when they do certain things that ordinarily we should have thrown out, we look at it, oh, these people have done well for themselves. So if somebody leaves about their needs in public office, we don't throw at it, because that is what everybody expects. That is what we think is okay. We also expect people to not just help themselves, but to also help their own. So you are supposed to help your family members, you are supposed to help your friends, you are supposed to help people from your ethnic groups, and so on and so forth, which we also saw in the film, that is about being presented. The other thing is that there is about about being appreciative, which is not necessarily negative. Being thankful, being grateful, right? But by the time you put that in public domain, what it means is that you're effectively giving people bribe. So because of the way we look at it, we think that the people in public office are actually doing us a favor by giving us a job, and we're supposed to reciprocate by being thankful. So it's expected that you are supposed to give them something in return. The other part is that because of red tape, public office, there are also certain things that people engage in to just get by, to simplify things for them. So this is expected that you pay a small price. That's the small price you need to pay to make sure that things move well. So in summary, these are some of the things that I've encountered in my work in public office and other places that we expect the public office to do well for themselves. We don't call it as abuse of office. We expect it. It's normal. And the person that doesn't do, I don't want to say is that talking about enforcement, there are actually costs to not meeting some of these expectations. If you are a public official and you are living within your means, you are seen as somebody that's stupid. If you are a public official and you are not giving contracts to your friends, whether they are qualified or not, you are seen as me. And it has cost. They will gossip about you. They are likely to ostracize you. And in some instances, you might even invite violence on yourself. So the point is that there are some of the things that we do, some of these belief systems that we have that actually enable corrupt practices. The same people who talk about corruption, who talk about favoritism in another place where it doesn't pay them, actually expect some of these things from public office. So I will stop there, for now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waziri. Thank you for that perspective from the public sector. So I'll move quickly to Oliver Stolpe. And from the perspective, Oliver, of someone who works, in this same field and the Education for Justice program, in your own thoughts, why do you think it's so important that we change some of these norms if we want to tackle corruption?
Well, thanks a lot for having me and for the question and for the opportunity. Also the opportunity to congratulate really Dr. Chattam, Step Up on year and Basement Animation for wonderful achievement today. And I'm very curious how your film will be faring. Now, to come to your question, what for me the key is very evident. Obviously, social norms are the drivers of attitudes, and we have the data for that, are the key driver to determine two types of behaviors that are so critical in anti-corruption. One is of refusing actually advances to pay a bribe, and secondly, to report bribery. And we have seen over the past 3 years in Nigeria, a slightly encouraging development in that regard. There are more people today ready to refuse bribes, to pay bribes when they're being approached. And that is a good thing. And it seems the second issue that appears to have been driving this more than anything else is actually education. It has not been the conviction that the government is effective in its drive against corruption, because Nigerians, unfortunately, despite the government making progress, are not quite recognizing that progress. So perceptions of corruptions are actually not improving, despite the fact that experiences of corruption are improving. Now, attitudes have been improving. More Nigerians, as I said today, are ready to refuse to pay a bribe. It's about 1 in 5 Nigerians, when being approached, actually over the course of 12 months said no, and did so in sometimes on multiple occasions. Education is key. We have seen that the highest number of refusals we see amongst people with tertiary education. And another very interesting fact, which I cannot fully explain, to be completely honest, is the fact that the greatest increase of actually negative attitudes towards paying bribes we've seen in people with no formal education whatsoever. So in a certain way, I see this movie that that reaches everyone, no matter what education, no matter what background. It is not linked to formal education, and in that sense, it will be different than the readings and the lectures we did earlier this year and last year in schools. It will really reach everyone, and I hope it will actually resonate with people and do that very one critical thing, to start helping people to change their attitudes towards corruption. And that is really the first step in actually achieving sustainable changes in anti-corruption, because the law enforcement part is important, but it will never in itself produce sustainable anti-corruption achievements. The moment that you take the enforcement away, the chances that we're going to be falling back into a state where we have been before are quite high. So changing attitudes absolutely critical, and I hope the movie will be doing exactly that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oliver. We hope so as well. So Ekanem, I'll address the same question to you as well. Why, from the governance and anti-corruption side of it, why do you think these social norms are so important to change to tackle corruption?
Yes, so thank you very much for having me here, and let me also congratulate the Step Up team for this wonderful initiative. It's quite refreshing to see this actually come to life from even when you were visioning it. And to add to what Oliver has said, why is it so important that we change some of these social norms? I think that having seen decades of anti-corruption interventions in Nigeria, we are missing a key ingredient, and thankfully, the conversation around social norms has really started to gain place. Why do we see that our anti-corruption interventions are not effective or even sustainable? And that's because many traditional anti-corruption programs have not really looked at what drives individual behavior. And as Dr. Lena had said, in many situations in defining what social norms are, I think social norms can really drive how someone behaves in a particular situation, despite even what the law says or even what the morality of the situation says. We often follow prevailing group behaviors to gain or lose social acceptance. And so for any anti-corruption intervention, or even for a holistic response, we actually really need to be looking at the social norms, the drivers, the key drivers, what drives a corrupt behavior in any setting. And also, I think so, aside from just the effectiveness and the sustainability of some of our interventions, we may also not be doing harm. There's been a lot of evidence about some interventions that didn't really look at the individual incentives or the drivers of corruption, and have gone on to actually do no harm. And as development practitioners, we do have, I think we have to ensure that we're not doing harm. So for instance, I think some emerging research around awareness-raising campaigns that are designed to actually raise public outrage against corruption is actually leading people to believe that corruption is actually the norm and is even said to be increasing corrupt behavior in some settings. And this is because I think that before designing some of those campaigns, people did not actually go to look at what are the drivers of corrupt behaviors in that kind of setting. Another example I want to give is a very popular example, is one in Ghana, where to actually deal with bribery in the police force, I think an experiment was done to raise the pay of the police officers, and this actually has shown that the social pressures on them from their families, from on their teams, actually for them to behave a certain way actually increased, because everyone knew that now their salaries have increased, and so the expectations on them actually increased. And this actually did not reduce incidents of bribery. It actually increased incidents of corruption. So just to ensure that our anti-corruption interventions are effective, they are sustainable, and they do no harm. This is why the social norms conversation is very important in any anti-corruption efforts that we are looking at. This is the reason why I think it's really important that we're having this kind of conversation in a place like Nigeria, where we've had decades and decades of anti-corruption interventions that have been semi-effective but have not really been sustainable. I think let me end there.
Thank you very much, Ekanem. Thank you all for your contributions. We hope the audience is engaging with the social norms discussion in the chat box. Please, we're reading your comments, so please continue to share there. Next, I'll go around all the panelists individually. Please, let's try to keep our answers to 2 minutes or less. So I believe all panelists have seen the film, An Advanced Screening, and it was developed in a way that both parents and children can enjoy the film together. So we'll go around. I'll start with Dr. Hoffman, then Mr. Waziri, then Oliver, then Ekanem. So what are your views on the film, and do you think it will resonate with families?
So yeah, we had I had the pleasure of watching an advanced screening of the film, and I think definitely what I came away from watching the film was, and I watched it with my daughter, and I asked her what she thought about particularly the main character, who was pretty obvious. And she said she wanted to talk about the governor's behavior. And she said, I think the governor's behavior was bad. And I asked her why, and she explained why she thought he was behaving wrongly. So I think what the film provides is a talking point for families, having conversations on about values, norms of fairness, norms of integrity, having conversations around ethics, those kinds of conversations that are necessary to have about citizenship, and being able to have those, creating those kinds of spaces and those entry points in discussion between one generation and the next generation of Nigerian citizens, so we can shift the locus of all the notions of reciprocity that we've all talked about. So where we have emphasis of what should we do in exchange for certain kinds of behavior, how do we begin to shift what the social costs are, what the social incentives of engaging a particular kind of behavior. Like we've all said, not every collective practice is bad, is wrong, but if we have a negative collective practice, how do we begin to create new social norms? How do we begin to create new collective behaviors and collective practices? So I think the film allows for these kinds of conversations between parents, guardians, adults, and young people, and even a kind of introspection for older people, for guardians, parents, older adults, to have with young people as to what a future of more universal, more common social contracts would look like for Nigeria. So I think the film has a great place as an entry point for those kinds of very critical conversations that Nigeria should be having now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hoffman. Mr. Waziri, please, your views on the film.
Thank you very much. I also had the privilege of watching the film, and I must say I like it so much. I like it very, very much. There's though this was meant for kids, but I think this is something that be good for everybody. It actually extended the from the book, actually. In terms of the book, I read it. That was primarily for kids, right? But this one is something that everybody can watch. Everybody will be kind of hooked in watching it. It's about 15 minutes. Okay, so I really like I like the film for two reasons. One is that he has used a compelling storytelling device to look at a very complex issue. The other thing is that it's not the usual didactic kind of stuff, that you just, okay, this is right, this is wrong, this is the message. It's something that you also enjoy, while watching it, and this is something that I think we should do more of, not just step up, but all the individuals and groups and agencies involved with engaging with people, with changing attitudes and all of that. So I really like it. I recommend it, and I commend Step Up Nigeria. I commend Basement. I would like to get their contact later. I also thank MacArthur and others for supporting this. This is fantastic. It's something that will encourage conversation, not just within the family, but something that will encourage conversation across the board, and will allow people to see something about this corruption issue, because we usually see corruption as, oh, some people are engaged in corrupt practices, right? What this movie has done in a very engaging and sometimes hilarious way is to let people reflect about the different roles that they might also be playing, the roles of the larger society in encouraging and enabling corruption, and why some of those things need to change, and how we need to come up with counter narratives, because as you have some negative or some social norms that enable corruption, there are also some other social norms that you can use to undermine that. So we need to have this conversation, and this is a very good entry point and a very engaging one, and something that will be useful to different stakeholders, and something that I would recommend. We have to look at engaging ways of telling stories, of hooking people, and of having the difficult conversations that we need to have about many issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waziri. Thank you. So next, Oliver, please, if you would share your review of the film, and if you believe the film would have any success in challenging some of these social norms that we've been talking about.
Well, I sincerely hope it will, of course. I think it has a good chance to do so. It's a very engaging story. It has good humor in it, so that is also, I think, why it appeals to both children as well as adults. You recognize a lot of characters, sort of like that you pass along in your life, sort of coming to life on the screen. But I think the most fascinating, and that I think is why it will appeal to people from all age groups, is the fact that none of the characters is completely black or white, so to speak, in a moral sense. It is simply, you see that change actually in Emeka himself. I think is a very inspiring one, and it gives us hope that even those ones that maybe amongst us who have failed in the past, can do better in the future. So I think it will hopefully do a lot, and exactly not only speak to young people, but really to all age groups.
Thank you very much, Oliver. So finally, Ekanem, your thoughts on the film? Do you believe you'll be able to change some of these social norms? And is it something that would, be attractive for the whole family as well?
Yes, I think like everyone has said, this film is really powerful. It's really captured in a way that children and adults can relate to. That this animation, the message is so powerful and it's so clear. I think for me, the most insightful thing about this movie is that it's really challenging our everyday behavior and actually showing us the cost of some of these things that we have normalized. And that's such a powerful message. I think a lot of the things that go on are really normalized and people feel there are no cost to it. But it really, in a very clear way, showed the cost of some of these things that we take for granted. I also watched the movie with my two daughters, and from the book itself, I had been struggling to explain to my kids what corruption is, and they just got it from the book. And then I think the movie itself really deepen their understanding. So I can see this as a platform for just having that individual conversations as a family unit, but even as a bigger public, which is quite important if you want to shift some of these social norms. There's a lot of evidence that movies really raise awareness and inspire change. If you remember The Inconvenient Truth in 2006, it really brought worldwide awareness around and debate around global warming. And this movie can do this about corruption in Nigeria. We really need something simplified that shows us the cost of corruption. So I'm quite hopeful that this will be a big hit.
Thank you very much, Ekanem. Thank you, Dr. Hoffman. Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, Mr. Waziri. Thank you so much for your kind contributions. We thank you so much. And this brings us to the end of this panel discussion. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your partnership with Step Up Nigeria so far and hope to do more in future.